So last week, or maybe the week before, I posted a video about health anxiety and its relationship to an adverse reaction I had to an SSRI drug. I've talked about how this adverse reaction went on and on for months because I was just so worried about it and worried about my health. But when I realized that I was truly healthy and stopped worrying, that reaction it stopped. And this is because that adverse reaction had become a learned stress response that just caused all these, scary sensations to persist on and on. That's what happened to me. Other people have different experiences. But if you want, you can watch that first video as it might provide some context for what I'm going to be talking about today. So after the events in that first video stopped, it was not happily ever after for me because I was still psychiatrized on a bunch of drugs, and I remained unaware of that deeper sort of emotional trauma that was actually at the root of that adverse reaction and explained why it went on and on in the first place. And as a consequence of not knowing this, I remained vulnerable to what John Sarno called the symptom imperative. And the symptom imperative just means that until a person truly acknowledges the things that the mind is upset about, the stress response may remain active. And new sensations may emerge even after the old ones subside. And the worst things that happened to me were protracted withdrawal sensations and persistent pain. And that whole experience was very similar to the adverse reaction in that I believed, oh no, I'm really sick. Something is seriously wrong with me. And this health anxiety, took off again. And I struggled to connect, my life trauma, with the stress response, driving the sensations. Now, granted, the sensations were really, really horrible and disabling, and it's, understandable why I thought I was so sick. But there's a reason, John Sarno called the mind-body syndrome, or TMS, the most painful thing, he ever saw in clinical medicine. So in this video, I'll talk about my experience with health anxiety in relationship to protracted withdrawal sensations and persistent pain that went on for about 5 years. And I'll kind of get into the way it took me, months of work to transcend those experiences so I felt healthy again. So when I came off of psychiatric drugs, I had acute withdrawal that turned into protracted sensations that went on and on. I also strained my back and developed persistent pain that went on and on. And I was absolutely just terrified of all of these sensations. Then I went on withdrawal forums, and I became completely terrified of psychiatric drugs and read that time is the only healer. Hopefully. And I therefore thought, that my brain might be damaged or something else like that. And I just became completely preoccupied with my health. I mean, what else was there to do? If time is the only healer, but to watch, the sensations and wait for them to stop. But, sometimes a watched pot never boils. And it never occurred to me to ask, what I now think is a tremendously important question. And that's, what was going on in my life at that time? What was going on outside of these sensations that might have been stressing me out? Well, I'll only mention one life stressor here this time, but it was a big one. And that was my overwhelming rage towards psychiatry. I've talked about this before, and I think it's probably a relatable one depending on where people are in their respective journeys. But there's lots of anger out there, towards psychiatry and the pharmaceutical industry, and it's all very, very justified. Now, sometimes this is where people say, oh, but I'm not anti-psychiatry, or I'm not anti-psychiatric drugs, or whatever. And these people think, that maybe only reforms are needed, as if that, some reforms will fix the system. And hey, I don't really know what other people's experiences are, so, everyone has their own perspective. But I think from a TMS perspective, it's really important to acknowledge the depths of our rage, the depths of whatever might be bothering us. So, for instance, I had so much rage towards psychiatry, who knows what I would have done, if I wasn't focused on my health, if I wasn't totally preoccupied by these sensations and disabled by pain. I mean, I wanted psychiatry destroyed. I still want it destroyed. But back then, when I would get really, really angry, the physical sensations would worsen. So I couldn't get angry. I had to suppress my anger to prevent the sensations from getting worse. Or sometimes when I did get into rages, my fear would, suddenly switch to panic, and I'd be in bed, just scared to death. Either way, my preoccupation with my health was actually in some ways, I think, protecting me from acting out my rage in full, or at least what my mind perceived that I might do. I wasn't actually going to do anything, but my mind was concerned about it. Now, I also think, maybe the pain got so bad that I couldn't leave the house even because my mind was protecting me from going out in what it perceived as a dangerous world. Too dangerous to experience with psychiatrists, and other oppressive forces out there. I also think I experienced derealization to protect me from connecting with human beings, who might hurt me again. In short, all these perceived threats just kept a danger signal firing again and again, and this threat signal just got connected to everything and made me interpret everything as dangerous. Sounds, lights, certain foods, movements, everything. But clearly, all this just spiraled way out of control, and this protective mechanism meant to help me became very harmful. And the fact that I didn't know that a protective response was going on, well, that just meant I was flying blind. I just kept thinking, my body's broken, my mind is broken. You see all these, you see on these pain and withdrawal forums, and I was like this too, you just have all of these, symptom lists, just boom, 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 all of these things, just like you tell a psychiatrist, just this list of perceived symptoms. Now, in some withdrawal contexts, this might be actually really helpful. But, when sensations go on and on and on, what do these symptom lists even mean? Do they always explain something? At least for me, if I had showed you, if all I showed you, about myself was, these symptom lists, what would you really know about me? Would you know enough to help me resolve these protracted withdrawal sensations? For me, these symptom lists just explain nothing about what was truly going on inside me and the stress response causing these sensations to persist. What do these lists put my focus on? Well, they just put my entire focus on my supposedly broken body and mind and focused me on the concept of protracted withdrawal syndrome, which to me just became like another psychiatric label and moved me away from understanding what was actually happening to me. Because for that, I had to go underneath, these symptom lists, beyond this bio approach, to understand what was going on, inside. And, sometimes in this withdrawal culture, there's something conceptualized as like neuroemotions or neuroanxiety, that is that just powerful emotions only come from, drug dysregulation. And that makes sense in acute withdrawal or tapering too fast. But for me, being so far out and tapering so slowly, at some point I had to move away from this concept and honor my own feelings that I was having and honor my own emotions, that sometimes felt, way out of proportion with the situation I was in at times. But I need to understand, why my mind was perceiving things as so dangerous. Why it had become conditioned to feel this way. Because there was a reason, even if it wasn't visible on the surface. And that's actually how I got out of this situation. And that was by honoring myself, honoring my emotions, and again, beginning to honor my own life experiences. I made a previous video where I talked about how I resolve protracted withdrawal sensations through a process of forgetting them by remembering myself. So forgetting the sensations by remembering myself. This is, not something that's generally done overnight, but a process of decentering the sensations and, bringing myself into the frame. And understanding that it's my mind's reactions to my life experiences driving this internal stress response that is responsible for these sensations. So one way I could start to forget withdrawal sensations and pain and my health concerns was by first remembering, oh wait, this has happened to me before. And maybe some of you have had historical preoccupations with your health or preoccupying thoughts or ideas, even before protracted withdrawal sensations began. Whether it's unexplained things like skin problems or panic or pain or migraines or sadness or, fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue, whatever. A significant reason, it seems, for these preoccupations is trauma or growing up feeling unsafe in some way, or they may begin after a stressful period. In other words, it seems like some of us have perceived danger before in our lives, and a stress response kicked in, danger signals fired, and we started thinking or feeling, something unusual to us. And we became preoccupied with that unusual thing. And once that happens once, it might be more likely to happen again. And these withdrawal sensations might just be the latest incarnation, albeit probably, the worst incarnation of them all. So for me, to stop this cycle, I needed to remember what had happened to me. What had made me so upset for my mind to perceive so much danger. And acknowledge my emotions, even the repressed ones from long ago that I couldn't even feel, could actually participate in maintaining a danger signal manifesting now as protracted withdrawal sensations, as persistent pain. And I needed to teach my mind that this was just a stress response, that I was physically and emotionally safe, even if I didn't feel that way. So I could begin to bring down that danger signal. I could tell my mind, I don't need you to protect me anymore because it's safe to have and feel emotions. And I could take some specific actions to rebuild layers in my life to act as defenses on my behalf, so I didn't need my mind to maintain sensations to protect me anymore. I didn't need this health anxiety or focus on my body to protect or distract me from what was going on deeper inside. So the deepest layer that I needed to rebuild was my fear of death. Death is something we all have to face. Many people fear it. And as I talked about in part 1 of this video, this was particularly important to me because of my Christian religious trauma and my fear of going to hell, which was my deepest fear. So I needed to research alternatives to help quell, this fear. And one thing I found some comfort in was near-death experiences, which seem to be a universal phenomena where people basically die, then come back to life, and report positive experiences in this loving being of light that seems as just that following a religion for salvation isn't necessary. What people often get told or experience in these near-death experiences is that the most important thing in life isn't necessarily, following this God or that God, but loving people and kindness to people. That's what truly matters in this life. Now, I had some, major failures in this way, but in these near-death experiences, people lovingly learn these lessons, and it seems that in these life reviews, it's actually us who judge ourselves. So I also think that developing self-compassion can be helpful in navigating this world, because it seems like self-compassion is something incredibly important somewhere inside of us. It seems to have even some sort of cosmic significance, self-compassion. Anyway, for me, having some sort of existential placement in the universe, some orientation, I don't truly know what happens after we die, but having some cosmic orientation towards something peaceful, I think that was really important for me in helping to calm down sort of an inner unrest that had been there for a very, very long time. Now, sometimes it seemed my biggest fear, wasn't that I was going to die, but that these sensations would just go on and on forever, or that I'd get worse. So for me, this death layer also included my preoccupation with my health, the perception that I was sick. So I needed to move on from this concept of protracted withdrawal syndrome, because that also just kept the attention on my body and kept this danger signal going, kept this health anxiety going. But like this cosmic orientation, this wasn't going to make the sensations dissipate overnight, but it was getting pointed toward a direction, and by working toward understanding my situation in a new light, I could start to bring my own life into focus, or a new focus. The next layer that I needed to build myself back up with was a layer of remembrance and honoring myself, because I had forgotten who I was. I was out of touch with how the events in my life had affected me emotionally and affected my nervous system, because I just blamed everything on the drugs. Now, I hate drugs, don't get me wrong, but at some point, again, what I was experiencing was a stress response. So one thing that I did here in this regard was journaling. And this was so important for me to acknowledge the past and see how angry and sad I truly was. To finally write down my feelings about the religious trauma, the psychiatric trauma, all the things that had really upset me. And significantly, I learned how to connect this trauma with the stress response, and how this trauma actually could keep this stress response going that allowed the persistent pain and withdrawal sensations to continue. And I actually made a video about journaling, and I also talked about personality traits like perfectionism, the need to be good, and how these kind of various internal pressures can also keep this stress response going as well. So I needed to learn, some self-awareness about how my mind was pressuring me, and I had to kind of learn how to exercise some self-compassion toward myself. That my mind honestly doesn't give a lot of on its own, but I am getting a bit better at recognizing that and being a bit better at that. The third layer of building myself back up was just getting back to doing the things that I enjoyed doing. And sometimes when sensations are really bad, this is kind of impossible to do, but doing the work above in the previous layers, it started to shift my perspective a bit so that I could slowly get back into some of the activities that were basically second nature to me, that I could maybe get lost in, where I could perhaps even forget, withdrawal sensations for some time, maybe. Because I was avoiding so much of what I previously enjoyed doing. For me, that was, playing hockey and running and socializing, or just doing something where I could place my focus on, in a meaningful way, not just watching TV or something, or films, what I did a lot of, but something that I actually loved to do, something that made my life feel like it was worth it again. Now, again, I had to kind of build my way up to this. I had to practice outcome independence as well, because this wasn't always successful. It wasn't, sometimes it was painful or didn't quite work out, but I had to develop the mindset that I do what I want now. I will do what I want, period. I'm in control, not my mind. Just a final few layers here I'll just get into. So what I also needed to get back to was some societal role. For years, I couldn't function or really do anything. I was just kind of miserable all the time. I hated my life. I had no meaning in my life. I had no meaning. What are we to do without meaning? So I needed to get back, into some of the daily routines of life, to participate in life again. Again, this took some time, but it can help, fend off this feeling of, being lost and scared and hopeless. And I mean, I still feel lost at times. I'm not sure exactly what I'm doing with my life, but occasionally I do feel, like I'm at home in the world, and occasionally I feel like I'm at home, in the universe. And, one massive part of doing that is just participating in society again and making human connections again, talking to people again. I barely talked to anyone for years, really. Making social connections can be hard, but just getting back into some banter again, I think, is so important, because the only conversations I would really have with anyone, were about these horrible sensations. And I would just talk about all these horrible sensations, how these were so bad, and how my life was ruined, and how I'd never get better and all that. I needed to have, other conversations again. So I actually stopped talking about pain sensations and withdrawal sensations altogether. I only mentioned them indirectly if I was sharing, how I was, feeling hurt on the inside. So I think, by building these layers, which are not necessarily linear, like, step by step layers, but I think they're kind of all intertwined, I personally, could stop kind of wallowing and just kind of waiting one day for there to be some miracle. I mean, some people do seem to wait it out, and it seems to work for them. But I needed something, else. I need something to do. And this kind of gave that to me. And I think these layers kind of gave me some solid groundwork to work on, and so I could show my mind that the world's okay, that I'm okay. I don't need to be protected anymore, because look, I'm going back into the world. I'm doing things I enjoy, and it's okay. So this helped take my mind off of the health anxiety and move me toward a return to life. Now, all this is obviously much easier said than done, but if you're interested in this approach, that I used, I would encourage you to read a book, by John Sarno or Howard Schubiner or Steve Ozanich. These people are also on YouTube, and they'll give far more information, than about this process than just this video. Because these sirens, as maybe you can hear in the background, I live in the city, they can go off a lot. And just reading these texts can help bring, this stress response down, just by getting into them, just by having them absorb into you. So you can look into that if you want. I guess I'll make probably another video for next week, and perhaps I'll see you then.